So, Dan, I am totally outside the Hollywood system. You are actually completely breaking into it in a massive way with Crime of the Century and with Why the Last Man, obviously. And we have totally different perspectives. Both of us directors, but I'm a writer. I like only do my own stuff. I write my own stuff and I direct my own stuff, where you have the perspective of somebody who comes at it in a whole different way. So I was just curious, for you as a director that works with writers, what does that process usually look like for you?
First of all, I should say that I'm just now breaking into this. But
Right.
even before I got into this, I always felt that my sights were greater than my words. When I went to film school, and I for a while thought I would be an editor, for a while I thought I'd be a cinematographer, and then eventually I realized I really like those things. I have good instincts for those things, and I can do them fairly well. But I am not a maestro at those things, and there are people that dedicate their talents to that, but also that just comes naturally to them. And I thought, oh, better to be the director and to collaborate with people that excel in those positions. And then I realized, oh, the same thing with writing for me. I am not
Right.
a word, but people are very good and at that specifically. So I decided, even before doing it officially, professionally, all the scripts that I had written, all the short films that I had done, movies that I had written before it started happening, I worked with writers because I felt like that was a shortcoming of mine. Process doing it professionally is very similar to how it always had been with friends of mine. So, like, Crime of the Century was an original pitch that we sold. So that was my initial idea. And I pitched that to my representatives, and they linked me up with writers. And I met with writers and would pitch them my ideas, and whatever spark happened between us, which happened to be Crime of the Century with this writer, Dan Trachtenberg, we then workshopped the idea and really fleshed out the story together. And then that sold. And then when we had to write the script, or when Dan had to write the script, we sort of dug in together, and I basically gushed everything that I wanted in it. Sometimes it was emotionally, wouldn't it be great to see a guy go through this kind of thing? Wouldn't it be great to see a relationship like this? Or I want to see a scene where this thing, and then when that guy that we referenced before, he comes back here, and that detail. To, man, I have no idea. Hopefully you got a good, and then he goes in and he sees a whole new thing, and, as you've heard in plenty of EPKs, and I will repeat, there are things that I thought would be good, and the writer made much better, and there are things I never thought of, and so it's very much that kind of collaboration that you have with all your other friends, family, and professional relationships. And then on Why the Last Man, that was actually a draft of a screenplay already that was quite good, and then despite it being good, I had a little bit of a different vision for it, which is what I had pitched to the studio and what they selected me for. Was that unique take. Then I had to sit down and work with the writers on how do we take the bones of what you guys did and guide it more in my direction. I was less hands-on with that because there was already so much of it there. However, in doing subsequent draft after draft after draft, we're still in that process now. We actually just turned in what could be one of our most complete drafts to the studio that has, hopefully reading it now. Or has just read it, I'm waiting to hear. That was, starts off broad, and then it was fine-tune and fine-tune and fine-tune, and then get into the nitty-gritty specifics.
So with your first idea, you kind of came up with this concept pitch. You pitched that to your agency, and then they went and found you some writers that could pair up well with you. That's pretty much how that worked.
It was a little bit more casual than that. I had like several movie ideas, and they sort of thought, oh, you should meet with this guy. He's got your sensibilities. You should meet with this guy. He's got your sensibilities.
So they're just kind of like matchmakers then.
Yeah, a little bit. In that scenario, a little bit. Some directors might already have a friend that I've written scripts with, like I said, friends from college that are screenwriters now. We have a movie that we wrote together, and things can happen organically that way. It just so happened that I didn't already have the perfect writer in mind to write a couple of my ideas, one being Crime of the Century.
When you're working on Why the Last Man, since that was already a script that the studio had, and you're very much working with the studio on developing that script, really, is that just like a ping pong match between the writer and you and the studio?
Pretty much. I think it's less confrontational than that. Well, because we assume that it would be confrontational, right, from what we hear about
Right.
how things. And I'm sure often it is, but it really is probably a lot like you with your short that you're doing now or the previous ones, and then you show it to Josh or whomever, and they've got ideas,
Right.
and at first you might hear that idea and go, dude, I'm doing, no way. And then you sit on a little bit and you go, I probably shouldn't have been so against that because now that I think about it, it's kind of good. But you become friendly with the producers, and from studio to production company. And, we all have our ideas, and I try to do the best I can to steer the ship. And
Yeah.
that is times having an instinct on I was wrong, their idea is better than mine, or no, I think despite them making a lot of sense, I think that still what I had initially intended was better. Or the writers, I may have guided them wrong, or maybe they're still not quite getting where we want it to be. It's all navigating those waters like it was in middle school when you had to work on a science project with someone else. It's
Yeah.
like any situation. It's the same feeling. It's the same. You feel that same frustration that you did back then. You feel that same joy that you did back then. You feel that same sense of relief when someone else has figured something out that was bothering you. All of those things happen. It's just happening on cooler shit.
Like say with Why the Last Man, which I keep bringing that one up because it's
Sure.
totally a
Absolutely.
script that you're just coming into and you're trying to make
Yeah.
that script your own. So with Why the Last Man, when you get a draft of the script, what's like an example of a type of note that you as a director would give, and how would you give it, and then give it, send it back to the writer for him to do something with?
Wild Last Man, I should say, is a writing team. It's two guys.
Oh, okay.
It's even more people. And by the way, I should detail the process a little bit in that two writers, I'm the director, there's a producer with the production company, and there's guys that run that production company. David Goyer happens to be a producer on it as well. He's a writer. He's written and directed and produced, but he did Batman movies and
Right.
Man of Steel. And then there's the studio, which is New Line, and they have, there's two great guys over there, these two executives, and then there's the presidents. So it's me and two producers, and then David Goyer. We work with the writers, and they give me space, and they let me work with the writers, and then we give it to the execs at New Line, and they have input, and then we hand it into the president at New Line.
Oh, wow.
So that's the chain of command. But it's really all like, how do we make this better? It's not like the studio exec, it's the
Right.
producer. But okay, you asked a specific note. Sometimes there's a certain relationship. I can even think in Crime of the Century. Relationships aren't working. A scene isn't as funny as you'd want it to be. Which is tough because humor is very subjective. Or an ending isn't working right, and everyone's sort of fussing over the ending, and then you might realize, oh, maybe this would be stronger if we went back to the beginning and worked on some of our setups before fussing over the payoffs, or create
Right.
a new payoff by creating a new setup.
So with notes, it sounds like you could be a little broad with it. Is it actually like a note that you would give would be something like, hey, this relationship isn't working, then you just let the writer take it and go figure that out? Or do you get way more specific than that?
I always hope that I have the answer myself. I always feel bad to be that broad, though sometimes that is the best thing, and it probably depends on the relationship that you have with the writer, or what the work that they've done so far. If you've given a broader note before and then they go back and create magic, then that's great. And then you want to stay broad because you want to, bring out the best in them. But sometimes if it's really not working, it's on all of you to come up with the solution. So you try and give a solution, and I tend to overanalyze and oversay. I overshare. So I will give like 8 bad versions, hoping that opens a door to, okay, that sucks, but this is great, and I never would have seen that if I hadn't looked through that window over there.
Right.
The window in my brain space.
Right.
Yeah, it can be as much as, what one note we gave was it should feel like that scene in Inglourious Bastards, or every scene in Inglourious Bastards that is basically, I know something you don't know. The scene with Christoph Waltz in the beginning and the tension of that. It's like, let's bring that in this completely different setting, So
Right.
something as, like, that's a tonal note, as opposed to, wouldn't it be funny if Oba just said this, or
Yeah.
that scene in Raiders where da-da-da, it's like, yeah, that kind of thing. So they can be quite specific and they can be quite broad.
Although one thing that I love is from talking to you now and talking to you before is it really just seems like the stuff that people are working on in major Hollywood films in these writer rooms and with producers is pretty much how we just talk to our friends about the projects we want to do right now. It's there's no
Yeah.
massive mysticism to it. It's hey, wouldn't that be cool? And it should be like Inglorious Bastards, like you said, which is it's
Yeah.
really encouraging to hear that it's not like so far above our heads as we think. I think everyone thinks it is.
Not at all. I mean, you have to know the audience too. I mean, some people won't know the references. I'm excited to be able to share this because I love the idea of demystifying things, and I also feel like I had a million questions before I had done it. Only to
Right.
realize that I knew the answers anyway.
Well, one thing I know people are going to want to know is like for you as a director, if someone were to bring you a script, what sort of thing are you looking at for a script? When you read a script, what is it that you want in there to even consider making this thing?
I mean, it's personal, I guess. So we'd all be after specific things. I have certain kinds of relationships in movies that I tend to like. I really love father-son movies. I'm less into really dour material. I
Yeah.
like when there's a sense of fun, even when you're talking about, the end of the world, a big major catastrophe. I got to say, sometimes it's very much more challenging when I read a script that's excellent because I kind of feel like it doesn't need me. Like,
Right.
yeah, so just make that, just shoot that. That's good. I like it more when something is sort of halfway there, and I may not even like it at first, and then when I go and think about it, I realize, oh, I should consider this because if I did this, 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 and this, that's exciting. And then realizing that that's so much more rewarding when you pull that off, rather than just shooting what's on the page. But I do want to mention that it's easy to forget that no one else is seeing exactly what you're seeing in your head. And not only do you need to remember that in terms of how you articulate your thoughts, because you need to be very clear and specific. Nothing is everything that seems obvious to you is not obvious to anyone else. And sometimes, like I said, you read a great script and you go, oh, just make that. Well, you would see it as being, oh, that's just someone just shoot that. We're all seeing the same thing, right? No, we're not all seeing the same thing. You need to hone in on exactly what you're seeing and spare no detail, because we're not all seeing the same thing. That's human nature.
Yeah.
By the way, a good thing to keep in mind when you're in an argument with someone, as well as when you're working on making movies.
Yeah, and I think I have two more questions. The first one would be just about when you read a script, just the writer's style. How much for you is it true to where be cautious about your word to white space when there's too much action line? If it gets too bulky, do you get exhausted and you really don't want to pull anymore? And what about things like direction in a script or kind of calling out maybe a camera angle that the writer wants to see at this moment? How much of it is true for you that stuff needs to not be in the script?
No, I definitely think both of those things need to be considered because, yeah, I think it's just human nature when you see a lot of right, and especially because you don't want to read. I mean that's just good. Right now I'm shifting all the things I'm saying. It's harder to follow, right? I'm like, it's just like that's harder to follow. More words are. If I had said one succinct sentence, it would be much more clear to you, wouldn't it?
Right.
So being succinct is always good. It's a gamble because some people who write in a fun way, sometimes that does make the read more enjoyable. 9 times out of 10, it just gets in the way because you just want to understand. You just want to see it in your head, right? You just want to understand what's happening and read it out. You don't want to get distracted by something that isn't even going to be visualized.
Right.
There are writers that set a great tone for how to visualize it with their specific writing style. So you don't want to step on that, but you got to measure that. And then your other question about directing the scene. Yeah, that's very troubling. I mean, what's worse is when people write in a very literary way and they take things for, as I said with directing, same goes for writing, when people take things for granted. And as a director, sometimes things aren't quite clear and you want to know, well, what exactly is this room again? It's nice that you're bringing it up to me, but at the same time, you want to have something to work off of, and sometimes things can be too bare. But it's definitely troubling when, especially, I've read a lot of like found footage things that I then feel I would like to not make a found footage, and I wish that it wasn't, those screenplays weren't so didactic and then the camera from here, it's like, well, I can't, it makes it very difficult to picture the scene because they're describing the scene per the shot as opposed to the scene,
Right.
and I might have a better idea of how to visualize that scene, or anyone else might have a much better idea than you telling the story.
Right.
Just tell the story, let us figure out the best way to interpret that, and it can be quite bottlenecking if you've already done that work. I will give you the best example that was given to me in a screening class when I was very young. That was the screenplay for Pulp Fiction. Tarantino describes the scene where they give the adrenaline shot to Uma Thurman. He says in one sentence, I think when Travolta shows up at Eric Stoltz's house, he says, "It's like an emergency room, except no one knows what's going on." What do you picture? I mean, I picture handheld. You know what I mean? That's emergency room. No, like it creates the outgo. As opposed to going, it's handheld because like you don't need to say that. Just say that and then let us interpret. But if you interpret that differently, then that's great. If you picture Steadicam swishing all around, that's great. That allows for that, as opposed to him saying the specific way he pictured it. And even within that scene, I still remember that lesson of like he wrote out like he pulls back the plunger and we see the drop of adrenaline dripping off the tip of the needle, and then so what that is extreme close-up drop, but he doesn't say extreme close-up, right? The way he described it made us visualize it in that way. That is the best.
For the last question, how much do you want the writer involved with you when you go to make the film? Like the script is done and you want to go to and make the film now. Is it sort of a thing where you want to take the script now and do with it what you want to do with it? Or is it how much of the writer's original vision are you trying to retain? Are you trying at this point to make it your own?
Well, this is all presumptuous because I haven't done this part yet. I mean, I have in my own small ways. I like having writers there, and I anticipate wanting the writer there just because I like all hands on deck. I want everyone. People that have been problem solving these things from the beginning are, I think, very helpful in crisis scenarios when we need to change a scene or something, whatever it is.
Yeah.
All of us that have been in the trenches together can help figure it out. I almost feel like I'd be lonely without those guys who remember when we spent months thinking about that? Well, now there's a split-second decision that needs to be made. What do you think,
Yeah.
So I like the idea of having them there, the writers there, very much. I mean, I guess it would be different. I mean, I can't imagine wanting to make a movie where I thought the writing was bad, and I mean, then I wouldn't want the writers there, but none of that makes sense. All
right, well, thank you very much for taking the time to do this. All that was very helpful. I'm probably going to bug you to be on the show again. I'm going to be honest.
It would be a pleasure. My pleasure.
Probably when directing comes around.
Oh, yeah, right, when you do. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, I would love chatting about this stuff. So
awesome. Thank you, sir.